So, hi.
Hello.
uh, Hello. This is just kind of a bonus chat of Adam, who's been working with me on this course, the growth mindset course. And yeah, we met at a camp we used to work at together that was a great ADHD environment. So we just kind of want to talk about what that was so people can have an idea of what that would even look like, because a lot of people have never had that. So Adam, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Adam. I am an educator and I worked at that camp for quite a few years and I really liked it because it just felt like a really supportive space. So I'm excited to talk about the ways that we think that it was supportive for people with ADHD or just anyone in general.
Great. So, one of the things that I really loved about working at this outdoor camp was the fact that we were in nature. And so we had to be adaptable and flexible to nature. So it kind of took off this pressure of like, there's one right answer, there isn't. And I think that in and of itself was one of the biggest foundations of having this growth mindset. So when we worked together, I was the director, and so there's part of that failure mindset or embracing that growth mindset through failure that I think brought into camp. But that was really because there were so many people who like weren't telling me what was going on that put people at risk. If there was something going on with the 10 or they forgot something, and it was kind of this realization of how do we make sure that we're all in community, which is the foundation of this camp, but like also really being in communication and acknowledging that there's no way we can get it right. This also was just a summer camp. So it was just, we weren't working together all year. So we really were getting to know each other, learning how to survive and keep kids safe in the wilderness. And, and also learning, about each other. And I think that almost is like you have to have a growth mindset. There isn't like a right or wrong way to do it. And we're constantly getting feedback and we're constantly having to adjust. What are some of the things that you think of like when you're working at camp that made it maybe to have that really great growth mindset?
Um, I think ex like the explicitly talking about a growth mindset and that like there will be times that we'll fail. And it was really helpful. We had a week of staff training before campers got there. So it really gave us time to get to know each other and kind of see the strengths that we all brought and maybe areas where we would each need more support. And so just throughout that staff training week, it was time to kind of practice that out and practice celebrating failure. And then by the time the kids got there, we had already created that culture that we then would welcome the kids into, which is really often different than how most schools operate. So coming from being a teacher in a classroom versus being at this nature immersion camp, it really was a quite different experience. And I think a lot of kids really thrived there.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of kids that might have had like, behavior issues in the classroom really were thriving at camp. And I think you're right. That first week of just acknowledging that one, no, none of us can do it all. This is like we're all in community. We all have to rely on each other. Nobody is like perfect. Nobody can just be the rock star and get it all done. And learning how to really support each other, even in the, our staff training of doing the overnight, backpacking, learning how to do that. Because for some staff, it was the very first time that they've ever done like an overnight where you're like putting all your gear in there. And it was kind of like a tradition in the camp that something critical will always be forgotten, whether it was the lighter so you could cook your food or something pretty pivotal, and how you can actually make that into like a really fond memory and a learning experience. That did definitely like set the stage of, hey, we're all in this together, we're learning and growing together. I'm so excited to get to know like all of your interests and what you can bring to camp. We even had like a former circus performer there who was juggling. Adam was like one of the best songwriters, and we like would make up camp songs, to whatever Disney movie of that summer. And so everybody just also got to like be celebrated in their own gift. There was space for everybody to kind of be honored in some way, and people were really curious about that. And I think that you're right, like that first week of camp training with staff really set that stage.
Yeah. Another thing that we had talked about is just like the ADHD people often struggle with um, routines and like sticking to a schedule. Like we thrive on it and it's hard for us to implement. But the camp had a pretty, not, I don't know if strict is the right word, but a pretty set routine for a lot of things like breakfast, dinner, lights out. And so having that structure, I think both during for the staff and when the kids got there is really helpful for somebody with ADHD. Um, and just there's definitely going to be some flex things like we talked about earlier. If you're out in nature, there might be a storm that'll kind of set the plans off. So we had a set schedule, but we're also willing to be flexible and kind of take a moment to all look at a cool bug we just found, or like we're very flexible with a set routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think that it's important to note too that at the camp, like we always started with a morning circle and evening circle. So we started with some type of community, and circles were really important because it wasn't this hierarchical structure. We had some of that, but like it was like we're all in it together. We can all be together. And it was a really nice way to set the intention, maybe have some slow movement in the morning. Various people got to lead morning circle, so it wasn't just one person. And then in the evening it was a really nice day of just coming back, reflection, connecting. And so you have this nice flow of making sure we're eating, making sure we're sleeping, but then also having those pauses, having those moments of mindfulness, along with lots of fun and new activities and growth and challenges and games that were throughout the day, as well as a lot of like breaks and pauses. And that was one of the people who founded the camp. They really wanted to make sure that reflection was there. So everybody got a journal. We always had journaling time every day, and so we had a lot of kind of structured free time and structured reflection time that had a nice flow that was able to meet a lot of the ADHDers and kids just in general, like sensory needs, and that challenge, that novelty, the newness, and really being engaged in the process.
Yeah. And I think like people like you were talking about, there was hierarchy with like a director, assistant director, but we also tried to not and hold to that all the time in creating circles. But then also those people like who did have a leadership role, kind of like modeling reflection and modeling like celebrating failure, where so it's like
Mm-hmm.
when after you left, when I was director later, like I would make sure to model like I sometimes make mistakes too. So just because I was the director doesn't mean that I was like free from error, free from criticism. And that I think really creates the space for other people. Because it's one thing to say like, oh yay, like we're gonna celebrate failure, but so many people have internalized like shame around failure. And so to see people who are kind of leading and in the driver's seat sometimes saying like, hey, I messed up, I forgot this thing. There was one time where I forgot I like had a vehicle key and accidentally took another one, so somebody got stranded and like I had to go back and just like being like I forgot, I'm like I failed, and like not being ashamed or afraid to admit that even though I was in a leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
And so just seeing that level of reflection and encouraging that, I think helped other staff and campers kind of participate in that. And I think also you were talking about like the reflections and having morning circles and evening circles is like that was a kind of norm for whole group things, but we would also break into smaller groups or even do like kind of partner sharing, or like you were saying with the journal. So just like finding different ways for people to kind of reflect. And for some people that might like just talking to one person versus talking in front of a whole group. So
Mm-hmm.
just creating lots of different ways for people to do those reflective growth mindset kind of activities.
Yeah, and a lot of times we would do in the evenings like rosebud thorns. So kind of like, acknowledging what were the challenges or what are the things that didn't feel good or what are you going to try to do tomorrow. And I think it was always with the rising eighth and ninth graders, those were the ones who did the overnight. And like that was the hardest thing for them. But the next day that's like at the end of camp, that's what they took away from it of just how they really connected when you challenge yourself, when you get, choose that space where it's a little bit uncomfortable, the amount of growth that they got. And I also think too, like just from the foundation of the camp, they really had, because with the focus on nature immersion, it was a very guide from behind type approach. And I think that also is modeling a growth mindset and is also excellent for ADHD as well because it fosters that curiosity and because ADHDers are tend to be like more intense feelers or have a lot of those trauma responses by being told that they're wrong. This really was a different type of environment of like, okay, well, what do you think this plant is called, or what would you call it, and really focusing on what their engagement, their effort, whether it was staff um, or the kids. And I think that is just really building that intrinsic motivation and that joy and creativity and learning versus like, no, you're wrong. When you see a kid, I'm sure like in class, like, oh, I know the answer. I know the answer. And then they spell it or they say it. And then you're like, no, and they're like, ah. So it really was this whole part of like really learning and growing because that wasn't really my strong area when I got hired for camp was knowing a lot of those terms, knowing which plants were edible and the names of, the trees and the other items that we were like focusing on that week at camp. And so that was like also really helpful for me, I think, too, as a leader to be like, I don't have to know everything. And that was really coming up from like the people who founded the camp and who had been, I don't even know what it's called, the director of the directors, her philosophy of really like embracing that and having an abundance mindset. Because I was coming from a nonprofit world where it was like, there's never enough. And so when you ask, it's like, oh, yes, of course. Like, yes, we can get this to you. And it was just this whole transformative experience, too, where it's just like, yeah, we're all really taking care of each other. And I mean, it might not be every single thing, but like you're really feeling seen and heard and being a part of the process. And I think that you could feel like from the staff level and that like also impacts the kids in that environment.
Yeah. I think also like the structure was the same for us for staff for like a month, but for the kids for like a week, where it's like kids might go to school and have a certain type of structure, might go to an after school thing with a different structure, and then another like at home they might have a different type of structure of just how they're doing activities or how they're organizing things. And so I think that like having just one spot is probably helpful too. So it's like you're not having
Mm-hmm.
to navigate different like cultural ways of interacting with adults or with peers at like different locations and just all being in the same spot, I think was maybe helpful for staff and kids. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think it does. I think it does that like, you're not switching from environment to environment. Like in some ways you don't get that break where it's like, oh, I feel safe for this, for the kids and staff in the beginning. But as the week went on, because it was an overnight camp, that we were able to, feel comfortable, feel that connection. And every single person said when camp ended, it's like, wait, where's my people? Why do I have like 20 people that I'm eating breakfast with?
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think those are like some of the real good foundational pieces. And I'm curious for you, that wasn't the very first environment that I had like this amazing, like growth mindset, very ADHD friendly environment. It was really in college when I was working for a family center and did some research for my undergrad degree. And that director was just amazing. And so that was like one of the best environments that I had went into. And then, our camp too was just an excellent environment as well. But I'm curious, do you have any of those other experiences? Because so many people don't even know what it's like to work in an environment that's good for ADHD, that's a growth mindset environment? What does that even look like?
Um, well, I think in like traditional public schools, not really. So most of my professional life, I've been working in K through 12 schools, and a lot of them are not very like ADHD friendly in a lot of ways. Um, so in that sense, I don't think so. But then I think like taking some of the community oriented kind of like reflection based practices and trying to take that into my personal life is maybe something like a different area where I've seen that be helpful. So just like thinking about gathering with family or friends and just trying like how we're interacting with each other. Um, but I think that for me, that was like a very unique spot where I guess maybe the only other place is probably some classrooms, like especially at higher education. Like I'm getting a master's right now. So I think some teachers have kind of created that more flexible, kind of open-ended lead from behind design. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I also like having experienced it, even if I'm in a spot where it's not that friendly, I like know what I thrive on. So I can kind of try to bring that into spaces. So like when I taught first grade, we would do a lot of circle times and do that reflection and kind of just building community and trying to validate everybody for who they are and kind of lift up their skills and provide support. And
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of contrary to a lot of what our dominant culture pushes. Like it's often very competitive and like
Mm-hmm.
kids definitely bring that into the classroom. But like if teachers are doing a good job supporting each other or like trying to get the class to support each other. And it's definitely different at the like younger elementary. Cause I used to work in elementary schools and most recently I've been working in high schools. I remember like one of the first
Mm-hmm.
times I tried to get my high schoolers to like get in a circle and just like share something. Like it was so different for them. And they were like, what do you like, what? And just like they're so used to like being individuals and maybe having like a friend or two in the class, but it's not like we're a community,
Mm-hmm.
we're all here supporting each other. And it's definitely can be hard at first, but I think most people tend to like that. I think we kind of like evolved as a species, often living in community and having like not just like a nuclear family, but being a part of like a group of 20 or like more people. And so that I think is like how we evolved to have, I don't, Daniel was saying a quote, something about like waking, like we're supposed to wake up and see like 20 smiling faces wanting to ask us about our dream or something. And I forget who
Mm-hmm.
that quote was from, but that like that is what we would do at camp where we had just like a group of people that were like we're here, we're excited to see you. What how are you? What are you feeling today? And most spaces don't really do that, I don't think.
Yeah, it is really interesting because like we're not taught we're taught the opposite in the US, right? We're taught the opposite of just this individualization. You know the knowledge, I'm going to teach it to you. You have to absorb it. Like you do it all by yourself. And that a lot of other cultures have this relational piece built in. And so it can be very confusing. And even I think a lot of John Gottman's work, who is like really popular in research for couples counseling, it's like just basic stuff of saying hello. And, since my spouse is from Mexico, like I see it with our kids, like, growing up, like you say hello to a person each whenever somebody comes into the room. Like it's just part of it. Like that's what you grow up with. And so like these things that are just innate that in other places or other communities, it seems so foreign or like, calculus or something like I don't even know how to do that because it's just all these little steps that aren't really broken down of how do you focus on the person? How do you celebrate them? Right. We're talking a lot about that, like a positive acceptance, the other pillar, as well, I think, in a lot of this, and just that acknowledgement of like, hey, we all have something to contribute and we all need support in something. And that also reminded me of just like the other kind of real bare like or like foundational camp philosophy of like everything has a place in nature. We avoid using good and bad labels because like everything has a purpose. Even if we might not want a scorpion in our shoe or tent, because we would get some of those. It doesn't mean that it's like bad or they don't have another purpose that's connected to the greater whole. And I think that also came into like our connection and community and camp and really like being curious, really celebrating, really embracing all parts of ourselves. And I think that is just a very restorative place. And that's why we would have staff come back year after year. Like I still want to go back, even though it doesn't really make sense since I have a kid who would not appreciate me taking off for like a month and a half without him. But it is just like this really, really fun. And I know some of the other staff that we've worked with, like, they go back because it's just amazing. It's been life changing for them.
Yeah. And even if folks don't go back, they still have like a positive, like, and I think are like changed by the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that's part of too, like, the camp when I got there, it was the very first year that we started the junior counselor program. So there was enough, the camp had been around enough that like kids who wanted to learn and switch into that role. And it was a really cool experience to see like how you can support them in gaining all these tools and switching from camper to counselor. And I mean, there's been like directors that now were campers and how it's not just with the staff, it's also with the kids that really connect with that place.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too, like, did you like do you feel like camp helped you with like some of those executive functioning challenges with ADHD? Because I think honestly, camp definitely helped me because I started when I was in grad school and uh, at working at the camp. And I think like the structure and also this what I call like the freedom with responsibility is really where the ADHD brain thrives. But like this, I can't lose these papers. I have to have a system. And I also have less space. I'm living in a tent. Like I just have a backpack. So it helped me kind of get into these routines that I wouldn't have normally gotten into because like, and being in that leadership role, right? Like if I forgot like an important paper, it's like, oh, this has an impact. And so I think yes, that kind of routine that was built into camp, and then also having that responsibility and that connection to others also kind of helped me get into these habits that I never really had before that were really helpful because like for me, I mean the digital age has been amazing because as a kid I would just lose like papers just like why or like mail I'm like oh stop it it's just torture. So I think those are some of the things that I think I really thrived on and as well as embracing that like failure growth mindset we're all learning together because I struggled with that I think before because I liked being the best or I liked getting a lot of positive feedback and praise and besides the other work environment that I was at. And then also when I was a kid, I did an Outward Bound program because my uncle used to work there. And that also was like another great like nature embracing activity, which is why I was drawn to want to work at the nature immersion camp because that was such a transformative experience when I was 14. But I'm curious for because you started like counselor and you've been the director and like for the high schoolers and the younger ones. So I'm wondering like if you noticed that like how it might have helped your executive functioning or some of the things that are challenging for a person with ADHD.
I think one thing that it really helped me with is like seeing the benefit of a schedule and like having a planned out like that. I once I became director, I had never planned out a month so much where like having a Google Calendar with like every hour for an entire month, like that's not something I would have done. And just like seeing how helpful that can be and how getting into routine can really be helpful and supportive of managing tasks. And then I think also the community aspect of a lot of the things where like we had community contributions, we would call them, of like certain groups would help with dishes one night and then switch the other night and just kind of like building those routines in where it's like I said before, like ADHD people like thrive on structure, but then also hate structure. So like
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to implement it, but then being like, wait, it's actually really nice if I do this. And so just like kind of realizing those things that are maybe I have some hesitation to because of my like how I'm engaging with the world, but then being like, wait, no, that actually does help if I do that. Um,
Yeah, and some ways it's like you have the positive feedback buddy, right? You have the celebrations because we definitely brought that in because some of the kids are like, oh, and so we made it like a challenge or like like to see who can like do the most for somebody else and really celebrating like their contributions. But and also the body doubling, right? So like that task initiation, if somebody is already washing dishes, you're like, oh, this is how I do it. So I can see like how that can be really helpful in creating those routines.
yeah, because it's like, I mean, yeah, because it's like if I want to do the dishes or do some like organizing, it's really helpful if I mean, outside of camp, that is like if I am talking to somebody on the phone or like listening to a podcast or something. And so having people that you're engaging with while doing the task, it like has something that you're focused on and the body double. So it's just a lot of support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's structure, but then there's also variation within that structure, right? Like you're not always doing the dishes, you have a rotation. Like, so there's kind of like that novelty built in to the
Hmm.
structure itself. Yeah, I didn't even think of that, but that's a good one. I also, if you don't mind me sharing, I remember like sleep too. Like I realized because I guess I was in my late 20s when I started working at the camp, and how important sleep was. Like I already knew that, but like seeing younger staff be so tired, and they're like, "No, it's not because I'm tired," and I'm like, "Oh, yes, it is." But I just remember this one time because you would like so often like just play this beautiful music on your guitar and sing the campers to sleep. But I remember that my assistant at the time and I were like, okay, all right, like, oh gosh, like, okay, like, I think this is kind of getting too late. Like, you need to sleep, and maybe some people can't fall asleep, like with that. And just coming up to you because I'm like, oh, I don't want to break Adam's heart. And I was just like, I love this music. I love all these things, and it's so great. And we need to get to bed. I have no clue how you received that at all. But like, I just remember also not even because that was my first year of being a director. So I didn't like being the person who stopped the fun because I like to have fun, right? But yeah, that importance of sleep that I think most staff got that connection to by the end.
I think part of that was like when I started and like I was younger. I think I was like 23 my first year and thinking about like a fully formed prefrontal cortex. And that's something where it's like as I worked there longer and became or like was in leadership roles of like seeing the younger staff versus the older staff where like the younger staff might really struggle with that like thinking ahead like oh I shouldn't be tired for the next day um
Mm-hmm.
and so like that's something where it's just like younger people might struggle with that a little bit more, but as they get older, kind of realizing those things. Um, it makes me think of like there was a time where we were when I was director of CC and when on like the staff overnight where we were like going to the offsite overnight, checking it out so the staff could get familiar. And we had been like we hiked up, set up all the camp, went down. We're like out in the swimming area and it was like 100 degrees or something and everybody that was over 25 was like we're going to go back and like rest and everybody else that was younger was like we're going to keep exploring the river and like look for other spots to swim and as director I was like kind of like same thing where I was like I feel like you shouldn't do that like you've been out it's really hot there's like a heat advisory but like they just wanted to do it and so just like those self-care things that like as when you're younger it's maybe harder to see the long-term benefit to it but just as you get older and more experienced you're like no I need to take care of myself to like be able to succeed.
Yeah, that's actually like a really good thing too about this camp that I think is really healthy for like ADHD and building a lot of these skills is that a lot of ADHDers don't have this. They have an atypical interoception sensory processing system, which means they might have a harder time like recognizing their body cues when they're hot, like when they're tired, when they have to go to the bathroom, when they need to go to bed, and like almost in this way of being in this like extreme heat or these extreme nature conditions, you see it in other people. So a lot of times it's easier to see in other people, and that helps you understand, like, oh, yeah, they're not functioning well. They're tired. Huh. Oh, maybe that's oh, maybe I'm like cranky because I didn't go to bed on time. So I think there's also this other part of it, of that community, and like getting that, almost like when you see it in somebody else, right? It helps you understand. And then because we're all in community, like if one person goes down, like that impacts everybody. And so like those are the things of like really allowing people to have consequences, but like that acknowledgement, we would talk about it, we would come together, it would be a very, compassionate with boundaries and safety there, way of kind of managing that. And I think that's just really restorative and just so great, for ADHD especially, but I think just for every single person. Um, but yeah, those elements, and you get feedback, right? Like even the person with the most energy hits their wall at camp. Like
Yeah.
it's just impossible not to. Like you don't have a surge. And that's really true as well. Like, for when you're looking at those executive functioning times of like when you're like maybe working too much, or you have a promotion, you're in over your head, or you're buying a house and doing something else when you become a parent, there's just like you run out of those fumes. And a lot of people who do have a lot of energy with ADHD just are like, well, I can just push through because this is what I've done. And so when you're hitting those walls, you're actually getting that feedback. And then when you see it in others, I think it helps, especially when we're talking about it and acknowledging it. And it's like not a scary thing, like, oh, we all go through this, or, like I realized this about myself. And, and the longer you work at camp, the more stories you have about camp. And so it just really normalizes that and makes it like a really safe space for people to grow together.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know if it might have been my first year where like we did the overnight and like half the staff got heat exhaustion, and just like we were like, oh wait, that like we need to take it slow, like take care of ourselves. And I think that was like at the end of the month. So it was just like yeah, sometimes you just need to take a break. You're asking too much of yourself. Like
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That was one of the things that I was always pushing for, but it hadn't changed until like, like the people that just never seemed to be phased were like passing out almost, just collapsing, from the heat, because it was like yeah, it was the trail. We were leaving in the afternoon, which in Texas is like the heat of the day. And I think after that, we were able to at least leave in the morning and then come back in the morning. So we're at least hiking in the cooler part of the day. And that's hard. I think that's also like we probably had a lot of people with ADHD as staff
oh
creating this, because
yeah,
it was like, we want to do all of these things. And it was learning how to say no. Right. And that was one of the reasons. It's like, oh, but we want to do this one part. I don't know, we might have even gone to Hamilton Pool before we did that. So it was just like we wanted to cram in more, and then there was a consequence. So it was a really good way of kind of like learning how we adjusted. And sometimes like, we weren't always right and we did suffer. But overall, I think that was one of the most beautiful things about camp, is that like from the people who started the camp and their intentions really trickling down to like the staff. And it's just been this really great place that I think has been really, a life-changing experience that you can bring into your own relationships, and then also like what you want maybe in your career or in other areas of your life, because it can exist.
yeah. And it takes like experiencing it to be able to build it somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is like when I ask a lot of my clients, it's like who has experienced this environment. Some people have, right? And they're like, oh yeah, it's life changing. But most haven't. And now sending my kid back into public school, where I don't have a magical teacher, great teacher, but not magical like you. I wish you could be his first grade teacher. um, like there's so much, there is so much structure, but there is so many like kind of, at least in Texas, right? Like so many rules and things that you have to do. And like the structure is just not growth mindset friendly, right? Like it is, I see, I'm reminded of how there's all this little trauma a lot of the times for like the neurodivergent brains, and and it goes beyond that too. But really focusing like on ADHD. It's just, ooh, this is tough. This is tough. And he was last year like at a very ADHD friendly school that's embracing growth mindset, lots of time to explore, community, all of those things. So like he comes back and he's like, I have no freedom. Like I know, kid.
Yeah, I
you
think part of
know,
it is like just the capacity of public schools where it's like we're asking one adult often to like look after potentially like 20 to 30 kids and just like the like wanting all the kids to be doing certain things at certain times and just like it's just kind of like a logistics things where it's like you can't like if you're supporting people and allowing them that like freedom to explore and like build knowledge rather than just like be telling you back the answer that you just told them, it's like it's hard for schools to do that. So
yeah. I mean, it's and it's not just the schools. It's just like how they're funded, right? Like all the different requirements. Yeah, but I mean, even when I was working at school as a school counselor, I was like, wow, like, as an adult, like we would never do this. You have no breaks, you have this short lunch, you don't have any free time. Like it is intense. Like you don't, when you go to a conference, which is an intense experience, like this isn't how it is for
yeah,
us. We just ask a lot. And that's part of it. It's just like they're, not funded. They are having to do 50 different things. And then you look at like the pandemic and those uh, extra impacts. It's just, it piles on and you're already underpaid. You don't have enough support. And so it's a multi-tiered thing that happens. And of course there's exceptions to it, but generally speaking, like that is one of the reasons that like, a lot of times like ADHDers do struggle because they're not ADHD friendly environments, and they're not getting the tools that they need to be successful when they do have to do like executive functioning tasks because it's just that kind of like almost fixed mindset feedback, right? Like you're either on time or you're not. It's not like, oh, what was going on today? So good to see you. Look, you made it to school. Now it's, and kind of looking at maybe the different barriers and then connecting it back to like the class and how that impacts maybe everybody else, like all those different things that would be more growth mindset oriented, um, as a classroom. But I mean, I definitely think it's way better than when we were kids for sure.
yeah. We only have like a minute and a half left before the Zoom ends. So I don't know if we want to close with anything.
Well, I guess like we could just say, well, thank you for taking the course, and hopefully this bonus chat was helpful in some way. And hopefully you will be able to experience a growth mindset in your work environment and then also in your relationship.
Yeah, I think wherever you're able to build it and just like finding spaces that kind of support that, viewing the individual, viewing their strengths and weaknesses, and like helping support each other. And just the more that you can experience that, the easier it is to bring it to other parts of your life where it's maybe not as strong yet. Yeah.
Yay! Yeah, and then it's really fun to find those people, and then you get to work with them, like Adam, because it was like, oh, I failed. Oh, look at we're learning because we learned a whole bunch, and it's just a very liberating, freeing experience to be able to not have any of that fear that you can't grow and learn together.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right. Well,
thank
thanks,
you.
Adam, for your time. Hopefully,
Yeah.
everyone enjoyed this. All right. Bye.